So those of you without your cameras on, that's totally fine. But if it's off by mistake and you don't mind me seeing you, that is helpful because then I can kind of assess the boredom rate of everybody on the Zoom. Okay, let me keep letting people in. Oh, okay. Oh, we're going to go. Listen, one more and we're going to the second screen. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome. I know I say this every time, but we have a very interesting and I think highly relevant Torah portion to talk about. Okay, got it. We got you, Ann. So let's say the blessing, and then we'll kind of jump in. I'm going to have Marty read for us because that's what we do. So let's join together in the blessing. And remember, it ends with the words la'asok b'divrei Torah. So here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok
b'divrei Torah.
That was pretty good on Zoom. That was pretty good. Okay, so chapter 13, the book of Numbers, chapter 13. So you look for it on your phone or in your text or your iPad or whatever you're using. I'm just going to turn my phone off, guys. Give me 1 second here. I don't like this buzzing. Okay. All right. So, the book of Numbers is in some ways a kind of it sort of picks up at the end of the period of wandering in a way, or it at least explains this period of wandering, and we'll get to that in a moment. And some of what we're going to read is discussed in Exodus. Some of what we're going to read is discussed in Deuteronomy as well as in Numbers. And I'll kind of indicate that when we get moving. But this is the famous Torah portion about the spies who go into Canaan to kind of do an assessment before there's an actual military assault to take over Canaan, or there would have been had the report been different. So we'll get into it. Marty, are you ready? Unmute. You're not ready. There we go.
Okay.
All right. So here we go. Chapter 13, verse 1, book of Numbers, Parshat Shelach.
Okay. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelite peoples. Send one man from each of their ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them." So Moses, by the Lord's commands, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, all of the men being leaders of the Israelites, and these were their names.
Okay, hold on. So I want to share a slightly different translation with you about this that I think is germane. So, you know what? Hold on 1 second, guys. Sorry. Where is my other? Here it is. We're going to do a little comparing and contrasting of translations. So I just want to get the other one that I want to talk about. Okay, so what Marty said was, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelite people." Now, there is an alternative translation, which is, "Send forth men, comma, if you please, comma." In other words, it's up to you. It's not it's not God commanding, it's God speaking to Moses and saying, send forth men, if you please, if you wish, and let them spy out the land of Canaan that I give to the children of Israel. One man from each of his father's tribes shall you send, everyone a leader among them. So what is the difference between send them and send them if you wish? Or is there no significant difference in anyone's mind?
But there's a choice. Moses is given an option.
But why is that significant?
Because it allows him to think through the process and decide, well, if I'm going to send the men, who am I going to send? Should I not send them? What are the risks? What are the benefits?
Okay, good. Roy, what do you think?
Basically, I'm going to mirror what Rebecca just said. The first sentence, or the first example you sent is an imperative command. It's a command. It's telling him. But as Rebecca said, he gave humankind the ability to make moral judgments or to take risks, to make decisions, rather than having someone tell them to do it.
But correct. I think, yes, this is a subtle thing, but it's a profound change. Because keep in mind this wilderness experience, this experience of slavery where everything was provided for them. It was slavery, but it's kind of like people in prison. There are 3 meals a day, right? So they had no agency and everything was taken care of. Then there's the Exodus. And again, manna from heaven, clothing that never wore out. They were taken care of by God. And here we start with this tiny little change to see, I guess, what I would call the weaning process, the transferring of agency and therefore responsibility from God to the Israelite people, to the Hebrews. And it's this, if you please, it doesn't seem like much, but it is the beginning of the end of this complete and total dependency and care. Now, Ben, you had your hand up, right? Ben?
Yes,
right?
I did. Thank you.
Go
I
ahead.
was just thinking
Nina, you're after Ben. Go ahead.
it also gives me a sense of choice where, send if you please, but sort of like I'm looking at new houses, but do I want to go down that street or not to check them out? I have this free will and
You have
choice,
agency. Yeah. It's both agency and responsibility. Who was it? Delmore Schwartz wrote that short story, in dreams begin responsibility. That was it. And so we're starting to see the Jewish people having to grow up, essentially, right? Penina, and then back to you, Roy. Go ahead, Penina.
Okay, given that a lot of the tribes already, a lot of the people that belongs to the different tribes were already settled in their land, since only 70 went down to Egypt, and the rest of them were not even Hebrews, and we don't know how much they accepted the whole 10 Commandments business. So I think they had also a problem, an internal problem, how to absorb all these people that chose to come alone and they are new to this whole situation. So to go check, I think it was also kind of like an attempt to see how would the tribe themselves accept those people.
Yeah, that we're going to get to what the mission was.
Right.
But
I think there is a dual purpose.
I think so too.
Also, yes, there were other tribes that were living there that weren't from the Hebrews, and they were always engaged in whatever, I don't know if it's war or misunderstandings or misaccepting, but it was always there. And those were people that were not necessarily sitting on the land and farming it. They were fighting. They were stealing wheat.
We got it. Penina, I got it. We'll get to the mission. We'll get to the mission.
Right.
But the point here is that the mission becomes volitional. It's a choice. I said Roy would be next. Go ahead, Roy.
The kind of a technical question. Whose translation provided that, if you please, and what's the construct in Hebrew that
Yeah,
creates
okay.
that?
So I'm looking at the stone. I'll hold it up for you. The stone Chumash, which is sort of colloquially known as the Chabad Chumash. I think it's excellent. I mean, it's definitely sexist and there are all kinds of problems with it, but it has some very, very, very good things in it. And I think better traditional commentary than the CCR URJ, the Reform Movement's one. So that's what it is. And it is. I want to see if I can find their note for you. Just give me a second. Oh, I see how they're getting there. The idea it comes from this idea, Shelach lecha, you send. So in other words, it's an imperative. It's not just send. It's like the way the Chabad commentary is looking at this is Shelach lecha is permission to send, but not a command. Now, they're obviously reading it that way for their own purposes. I'll read you the note, okay? As explained by the sages in Rashi in both chapters, the people came to Moses and asked him to dispatch spies in order to spy out the land, and then report back. Moses consulted God, who said, now they're making this up, but this explains the perspective, who said, I have told them the land is good, but since they question me, I will let them test my veracity at the risk of being misled and losing their chance to enter the land. And it's really this idea that God is now kind of handing some responsibility over to the people. But the lecha is the word, Roy, shlach lecha, you send it, and they interpret that to mean if you want to. I'll tell you a really funny story that just comes to my mind for some reason. Years ago, I was at a party and Norman Lear was there, and he was talking about when he called his mother to tell her that he was going to be honored by the Television Academy, and they were going to do this big thing, and her answer to him was, well, if that's what they want to do. So, it was kind of, well, so it's kind of that view of, if the people don't believe me and you want to, go ahead. But the big idea here is this transferring now, slow beginning of transferring some agency and responsibility to the people. Okay, I think we beat this horse to death pretty well. All right, let's keep going. Marty? Oh, by the way, everyone a leader among them means he's sending people of real renown and repute because he wants whatever comes back to be credible and for the people to essentially believe it. So he's not just sending some schleppers, right? He's sending people like Joshua and Caleb. Okay, let's roll.
All right. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev and onto the hill country and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell there strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not?
Yeah, are there trees or not, essentially?
Right. Okay. And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Now, it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes.
Okay. Now, what is God essentially suggesting as the mission is to, check it out, see what its natural resources are, see who lives there, see what kind of cities they live in. And that's it. That is the report that God suggests that Moses ask for. And we'll see in a few minutes, he gets back something a little different. He gets back a slightly but critically different set of facts and data than he is requesting. Okay, and we're in this Parsha is one of those that's very easy to understand if you just read it, but if you start to really look at nuance, it becomes a more interesting Torah portion. So we're gonna look at things that are kind of seemingly small but actually large. Okay, all right. So this is what he asked for. We now know what he asked for. Okay, now let's hear what happens.
They went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rahab at Lebo Hamath.
That's because the grapes were old vines infidel.
Yeah.
By the way.
Okay. Naturally.
I'm kidding.
They went up into the Negev, and in Hebron where lived Ahaman, Sheshai, and Tamai, the Enkelites. Now Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. They reached the Wadi Eshcol.
By the way, just to make a slightly, I don't even mean it as a political point, but it's a legitimate biblical point. Hebron, of course, is where Abraham buried Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. Hebron, there have been Jews living in Hebron for 3,500 years. And Hebron, as you know, is in what we call the West Bank. So I'm not one of those guys who thinks we were here first matters. I don't think it matters at all who was there first, but that's just me, because I think who we were here first is, that very, I think, impossible question to answer, which is, when does history begin? It depends on whose history you're talking about. So, but for those of you on this Zoom for whom we were here first is important, does matter in your construct, you should look at what we're reading about here. We're reading about Hebron, where Abraham buried Sarah. And there have been Jews there uninterrupted, and still are. So just a point for those of you who want to get into debates with people about when history began. All right, let's keep going.
Right. They reached the Wadi Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by the two of them, and some pomegranates and figs. That place was named the Wadi Eshcol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there. The end of 40 days, they returned.
By the way, I'm going to point out something else that I think is going to be important. There's a change in the grammar, which is when it comes to Hebron. Okay, look at verse 22. They ascended in the south. Okay, they ascended in the south. The Ya'alu, they ascended, plural. And now what does it say, Marty?
All right.
They ascended in the south, and he, singular, arrived at Hebron. They all went up, but only one went to scout out Hebron.
I didn't read quite that way.
What does your translation say?
I've got the Tanakh, the Holy Scriptures.
Yeah, and yours says they went up to the Negev and came to Hebron, where lived, right?
And
so this is why I'm calling it out. Every translation is an interpretation. That's an extremely important point. Every translation is an interpretation. So you see in the Reform Movement's translation, they ignore the change in grammar. They just ignore it. and say they went up into the Negev and came to Hebron. That is not an accurate translation. The accurate translation is they ascended, in the south, and he arrived at Hebron, plural to singular. Now, what is the difference and why does it matter? Okay, Penina, go ahead. Make sure you unmute.
Okay. Sarah was a princess, and she had her own tent in Hebron. When she left Abraham, after she got mad at him that he was about to sacrifice Isaac, she left him. And she went and lived in Hebron in her own tent. So the person who went to Hebron went to pay a tribute to Sarah, who was the mother
Nice.
of the Lord.
I like it.
Yes.
Anyone else have a theory about this change in grammar?
I agree with this lady. That was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a nice insight. I have a different point of view, which is I think this entire story is about the disproportionate power of the many and the few. And what a difference sometimes a single individual can make, and at other times how irrelevant a single individual can be. And I'll explain that more when we get to the report and the end result of that report. But I think it's simply interesting as scholars, which all of you are, to see that these translations need to be carefully examined because they make judgments. And they chose to ignore the shift in grammar here, the shift in person. And there's a reason, and we have to try to figure out what that reason is. Okay? All right, let's continue.
All right.
Rabbi,
The end.
Oops, sorry.
it's Brad. Can I
Okay,
ask a
sure. Go ahead, Brad.
question? 3 times it's repeated, they went up. And I wonder about the significance of that. And let me finish my thought.
Sure.
If they're in hill country and they're looking up at what they see, then there's a great chance for optical distortion. I mean, think about little kids when they look up at adults. And I wonder if there isn't or there's some metaphoric issue about going up.
There is.
The whole, and it's interesting that it is repeated 3 times.
Yeah. So there's a lot. First of all, let's deal with one at a time. The repetition, the Torah is highly formulaic. Robert Alter wrote an amazing book about this called The Art of the Biblical Narrative. It's formulaic because, remember, Torah was meant to be heard, not read. People didn't have what we have today. I have 2 books in front of me and my phone on a third commentary. They didn't have their own copies of anything. So Torah was an oral tradition. And the writing, therefore, is writing meant to be heard, not read. And when you are writing to be heard, not read, repetition and formulaic language and rhetoric is extremely important because it's easy on the ear and it helps people tune in. This is very similar, for example, to like classic folk preaching, and like jazz, where there's a verse and a refrain, a verse and a refrain, a verse and a refrain, because that is accessible and easy on the ear. And so this is a very common biblical motif to begin sentences in an identical fashion multiple times in a row. For example, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, or V'yomru, v'yomru, v'yomru. They said, and here you have they went up, they went up, they went up. So I think there's something interesting to be said about the repetition. The fact that it's 3 times, I don't think means anything. At least nothing I can think of or have found. Now, your next question about perspective is very interesting. And I think the sermon here is that our thoughts and our, how can I put it? The Google Earth perspective is sometimes very important. What to get above the fray, the daily, that which you can only see at your own altitude, level, height, etc. Panina, you put your hand down. I see it. I'll call you. And one of the things that religion in general does, I believe, certainly does it for me, is at times it elevates us and gives us the long view, or what today we would call the Google Earth view or the macro view, which is sometimes enormously instructive and enormously comforting. And at other times, the comfort and the beauty and the meaning is in something entirely granule, small, right in front of us. And we see here, now maybe like I'm spinning this into a sermon that doesn't exist, but so what? To me, it's this view that we need both perspectives in our life. What we do today means everything. What we do today means nothing. And it's kind of like that old midrash about every person should walk around with a phrase in their pockets. In one pocket, it should say the world was created for me. And in the other pocket, it should say I am nothing but dust and ash. And that it is somehow balancing or living within the tension of those two views that leads to a meaningful, purposeful, and accurately envisioned life, right? So sometimes it is really helpful to say, in the scheme of things, this means nothing. That's the ascension, that's the ascending view. That you people, our lives, it's all pretty small from up here. This is what Job says to God, right? Job says, you're only human. You don't see what I see. You don't understand what I understand. And then there's the other side, which is the intense focus on the now, the present, and the individual. And they are diametrically opposed and yet both essential. So that's where my head goes, Brad, and it's not just my head. I've read a couple of commentaries about this idea of how things look different from above than they do when you're in them, right? That's why looking back on your child's teenage years is funny now, but it wasn't so funny then, right? Okay, now that's my thought, at least, Brad. Panina, go ahead.
Okay. I am looking at a sentence in the Bible that said that when Isaac got married, he brought Rebecca to his mother's tent.
Right.
Which shows me that the person that went to Hebron was not just paying homage to Sarah. He went to the beginning, where Isaac and all the rest of them connected with.
There are a lot of beautiful.
Well, they started the whole family line.
Yeah, Hebron. Yeah, Hebron is Hebron. Listen, I'm going to piss off the liberals, and then I'm going to piss off the conservatives. Okay, and this is directly related to what's happening in Israel.
I have
liberals,
to add,
Panina.
I have to add something really. I think it would be fun to hear.
Go ahead.
The people in Israel, in the army especially, are looking for the strategies of what was done in the days of the beginning, because you could learn a lot from it. They found out that it took them 40 years because Moses took him through what today is Saudi Arabia to cross the sea for the purpose for the chariots to be stuck in the mud, because it was a middle of the month and there was a tide that went up. And they figured now that if they went that way, that's why it took them that long. And it is the south. So when you say to go up, that's exactly what happened. They went.
Yeah, okay. I don't buy it.
This is a modern theory.
Yeah, this is very modern. So look, Shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry, okay.
Oh no,
I'm going.
what were we just talking about prior to that?
Going to Hebron.
Oh, in Hebron, right. Pissing off liberals and conservatives at the
That's
same
right.
time. Okay. So let me first say something that the liberals will not like, which is from a biblical perspective. Hebron is more important than Tel Aviv. So if you're coming from that perspective, which the religious right is in Israel, you may not agree with, but you can understand at least why this obsession with land and land that has been in dispute. But from a biblical perspective, Hebron is more important than Tel Aviv. And liberals don't want to hear that because they don't want people fighting for this land that we share on the West Bank, which of course we know is east. It's the West Bank of the Jordan, but it's Eastern Israel. Okay. So that's why this business about Hebron is so important. Now, I will piss off the conservatives. While it is true that from a biblical perspective, Hebron is more important than Tel Aviv, it is also true that land theology, or the value of land, is not the highest priority in Judaism. Peace is a higher priority. This land theology, if it results in so much death, it is subordinate to the value of peace and the value of life. These, again, I guess we're dealing with this, once again, this notion of dualities. These are both true. But nowhere I can see is it written that Jews must risk the lives of their young boys to go protect some crazy settlers in some trailers in Hebron. I can't find it anywhere because it doesn't exist. So this, in a way, is the oldest of stories and tensions, and it's today's news. So both camps have something real to stand on. And this is why the tensions are so difficult to resolve. Any questions, comments, etc.? Boy, what a docile group we have today. Okay. All right.
No, just you're brilliant. You're brilliant. The way you put
Okay, I'll take the win. Yeah. All right. Let's now push on into our text, okay? Marty?
Okay. And this is breaking news. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. And they made their report to them and to the whole community. And they showed them the fruit of the land.
Now, interesting point, 1 second. This is a public report, interestingly enough. Okay? The idea here is to be straight up with the people. This was not a report delivered privately to Moses and Aaron. Moses sent them of his own volition, but he is having the report made in front of the entire community. That, to me, is called good leadership, even though we're about to see a kicking of the beehive. Okay, go ahead. They reported to him and said,
we came to the land.
By the way, here again, I'm sorry, but here again, you see this plural and individual. They give this report in front of the entire assembly, and then the Hebrew says they reported to him, meaning Moses, and said. So, go ahead.
All right. It indeed does flow with milk and honey, and it is fruit in its fruit. However, the people who inhabit the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Ankelites there, the Amalekites.
Let me stop you. The Anakites. The Anakites, an Anak in Hebrew means a giant. So these were fierce people, giant people, and they're there. And their sons and daughters are there. Go ahead.
Okay, Amalekites dwell in the Negev region. Hittites, Perizzites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan.
Okay, so these are fierce armies. You need to know a little bit more to know that than just reading it. But these are Anakites, who are giants. Amalek was the paradigmatic villain in Torah in terms of killing Jews. You're supposed to say after his name, Yamach Shmo, may his name be blotted out. Which, by the way, I've also found interesting that by saying that, you actually perpetuate the name. If you really want it blotted out, you just don't say it. So I've always seen that as a kind of strange paradox, that when we want to curse someone, we say, may his memory be blotted out, may his memory be forgotten. But we say it after we say their name. So it's a little strange, but I don't know what to make of it yet. Okay, let's keep going. And now, Caleb silenced the people toward Moses. So what we know without hearing it is the people go crazy when they hear this. They express a great deal of fear and anger. And Caleb silences them and says, go ahead, Marty.
All right. Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it.
Okay. Ki yachol nuchala, because we can do it. We can go up and, we can take these people. We can win. Okay? All right. Go on.
But the men who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack those people, for it is stronger than we. Thus we spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land that they had scouted, saying, the country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and we must have looked to them.
Okay, now, how much of this commentary did Moses request when he sent them on their mission? What are they layering in here he didn't ask for? Go ahead, David. Unmute.
They're giving a subjective response to something he asked objective questions.
Correct. And what is the nature of their subjective response?
Anxiety, to put it mildly.
Yeah. So imagine had they simply given the objective response. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. The cities are well fortified. Here are the people who live there. A straight up, without commentary, answer to each question Moses asked them to answer as they went on their mission. But they come back, and there's a saying in the Talmud, which is, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Now look at this last line. To me, this is one of the saddest lines in the Torah. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we must have looked like grasshoppers to them. We felt like, were they grasshoppers? Were they incapable? No. But you have here, let me see how the reform, we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. So what is the real problem we're dealing with here? It is an expression of anxiety, but what is the root cause of this anxiety? Go ahead, David.
Self-esteem,
A lack thereof.
a
Right?
lack of self-esteem.
Right. We felt like grasshoppers, and they must have seen us that way. And this is the reason that this generation is deemed wholly unfit to possess the land, assume agency. They have the mentalities of slaves. They have low self-esteem. Now, from a religious perspective, the reason that low self-esteem is so offensive to God is because of everything they have experienced before this. When have they been let down? When have they not been able? And suddenly, when you give them some agency and they have some responsibility, they chicken out. 10 of the 12, they basically chicken out. Except for 2, right? Joshua and Caleb, who say, yeah, here are the facts and we can do it. Ben Gurion once said, any Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. And he was talking very specifically about the existence and survival of the state of Israel. But yeah, David's calling it right on for us. These were leaders. Remember, these weren't some ordinary people that you might expect to be afraid like this or lose their faith or have low self-esteem. These are the leaders of the tribes, the leaders of the community, and they're cowards because of low self-esteem. And this is why that 40 years needs to take place. This is why that whole generation has to wander and die off, and only a generation born in freedom, born with agency, will be capable of this mission and, frankly, deserving of the nation of Israel. Anybody? I want to give anyone a chance besides Penina for a second. Rebecca, is your hand up? Please unmute. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit. I don't understand. Well, first of all, I've never heard of the concept of land theology. How does land theology fit into this story of scouting out the land and then taking the land from the giants and the warring?
Well, what I mean by land theology is this was promised to us by God. That's a theological statement, right? That's not an historic. That's not about geography or history. That's a theological statement. Okay, so that's what I mean by land theology. This belongs to us because it was promised to us by God. That's what I mean. And as if, and when I get to land theology, when you privilege that over life and peace, that's where I think you have the wrong hierarchy of values when you look at what Judaism stands for. Jonathan?
So I had my hand raised from the point about self-esteem,
Yeah,
and the point about providing what wasn't asked for. I think it's really kind of stark in verse 31, where they're making the statement. They're telling Moses, "We cannot attack that people, for they're stronger than they." So not only do they have a lack of self-esteem that's driving a fear, but they are energizing that with a sense of authority that they actually don't really have. So it's like the colonel telling the general, or the captain telling the colonel, or the sergeant telling the captain, boss, you can't do this. And
you remember when I was talking earlier about how there's that change in grammar. It goes from they went up to he went to Hebron. Yeah. This is one of those cases where two individuals do not make a difference versus 10. And then we have other cases where a single individual makes all the difference. Nachshon, for example, walking into the sea and then it opens. And one could create a sermon about why is it that the people immediately gravitate to the worst scenario, which, by the way, as David pointed out, is entirely subjective and based on fear. They're seeing the world as they are. They're not seeing the world as it is. Why? And this is a human, not just a Jewish proclivity. We joke about it as a Jewish proclivity, but it's a human proclivity. You know that I've told this joke a lot, so if you've heard it, please forgive me. This is a joke about the Jewish pessimist and the Jewish optimist. So the Jewish pessimist says, "Oh my God, things could not be worse." And the Jewish optimist says, "Of course they could." So you know, we joke about our pessimism. It's in our DNA, the you know, intergenerational trauma. I'm glad you like that one, David. The intergenerational trauma, right? And that's all very real. And we sometimes have to work very hard to take the win, to accept good news. Somehow we just don't quite believe it. And I think there's an important sermon in here.
May I ask a question, Rabbi?
I'm sorry, somebody say something? I lost
Yeah,
you.
may I ask a question about peace? We were talking about peace and the
Sure.
optimist.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that I actually going to say this. Everybody knows this. I feel this way. Music is the absolute universal language. Music heals, and I think that if people come together, when you play a piano, everybody likes to hear it. Don't ask what religion you are, what country you're from. We got a solution here, and people need to work on it.
Amen. All right, Brad, and then Panina. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, you know, maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but to me, this is a perception issue again.
Yes, right.
You know, they've been misled by their senses. And obviously, these people are not giants. It's just a perception problem,
Right.
especially when you're looking up at something. So this is contrasting senses and faith.
Correct.
And that's what the rub is here, that they're lacking faith.
Not only senses and faith, but empirical evidence. Were there not just 10 plagues? Did the sea not just split? Did manna not just fall from the heavens? There is empirical evidence that this is going to be okay. It's all three. It's low self-esteem. It's perspective. It is kind of a gravitating to the lowest and most frightening, and allowing that fear, that catastrophic thinking, to actually obscure, if not obliterate, past evidence to the contrary. You know, it really is. It really is about this frightening component in our Jewish DNA that I think many of us have and many of us understand. And I'm not saying it's only Jews, right? That's not my point. But here it is, baked into this story. Panina and then Carol.
Okay.
We only have 6 minutes, so I'm going to ask you guys to be quick.
Okay, so you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, they were slaves. They are generations that came from slaves. They were beaten up. They were given nothing. And now they expect to be.
They weren't given nothing.
Owners of properties and getting along with everybody while they were killing each other over there, probably for a piece of bread.
No.
No. And all of a sudden you take this generation of slaves, and even though they've been there for 40 years and maybe they have already kids and grandkids, but it's still a mentality of slavery. That's why they left Egypt. And now you expect them to go into that land. Everybody that they're going to see, even if they are medium size, are going to look like giants to them, just because of the strength that they give themselves not having.
Nina, there's no question that this generation has the mentality of slaves.
And
But
another thing,
Nina,
another
stop,
thing,
stop,
we
stop.
have,
Nina, stop.
okay. All right.
But it is not true that they were coming from a slavery of material deprivation. Because later, when they're free, remember what they're longing for? The melons and the leeks and the fish and the this that they had in Egypt.
Right.
So, yes, they have the mentality of slaves, but they were not suffering in the way that you've described. But I agree with you, they have the mindset of a slave.
There also is another half to the story, okay? When Abraham came to the land was barren, totally barren. He had to dig wells in order for anything to happen. Then came the Philistine, conquered the land, and blocked all the water wells. Came Isaac, reopened all the water wells. So it's a way of coping, of making things happen. Again, I'm saying, even though it was already a couple of generations or one generation ahead of time, you still come from a background of you were told what to do and you were punished if you didn't do it.
That's exactly the point that we're making. And
yes,
what I'm saying is that what I see in modern Judaism is multiple generations.
It's people that say, yes, I can, for people who say, no, we can't do it.
Right.
That's it.
That's right. Carol. Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I miss? Did I miss? Oh, but let's go Carol and then Dana. Okay, go ahead. Unmute, Carol. Unmute. You're muted. You don't know how? Look for the microphone with the red line through it and press on it. Okay, let's let Dana go. We'll come back to you while you work on it. Okay, go ahead, Dana.
Hi, everybody. I just want to touch base on what you said about intergenerational trauma, because I'm a psychologist and that's something I've been studying and lecturing on, and definitely have my own fill of that from grandparents who endured the pogroms. But I want to say at the same time, it may be part of our DNA to have this intergenerational trauma and anxiety, fears, and worry. At the same time, we also have the resilience. We all descend from people who survived and have resilience. So you have to sort of, look for that part in yourself and nurture that part in yourself, the resilience.
I'm glad you raised that. Let me ask you a question, which I've always wondered about. And it's a kind of catch-22. So the reason any of us are alive today is because our DNA, we descend from ancestors, and we have their DNA, some of it. And we go back, let's just say 1 million years, okay? The people who survived were the ones who thought catastrophically. They did live as if there was a tiger behind every tree. They lived with anxiety. They're the ones who survived back then, and we have their DNA. And so it's kind of this strange catch-22 where we are the recipients. We have received the reward of their anxiety and their pessimism and their catastrophic thinking. And that's why we're here. And it also imprisons us.
Yeah, it's both simultaneously, but I did a lot of research into my family history. And so if I feel a certain way, if that spidery sense gets alerted in me, if my intergenerational trauma and fears, anxieties kick in, and I think there's a tiger around the corner or behind the tree, I have to ask myself, wait a minute, is this me? Is this today? Is this what's happening right now to me in this very moment, sitting in my kitchen in Los Angeles? Or is this more like my grandparent who XYZ? And I know everybody's story in detail, and I feel like for me that it explains a lot of my feelings and reactions. I understand where they come from.
Yeah, in a sense, I mean, we don't live with tigers behind every tree, but in a sense, our biology hasn't caught up to modernity. like we're carrying the DNA of catastrophic thinkers, and they survive because of it. And yet we
I'm
don't
on,
live in
by
a
the
time.
way.
Okay, we don't
I
live in
think
a
that
time when we need to be so catastrophic. You know, it's.
I think the antidote is to have a conversation with yourself, not just accept anything at face value, but to think about it, evaluate it, you know, be in dialogue with it, and not
right.
just
Is
have
that
only
me,
automatic reactions.
is that me or my depression era father talking right now?
Exactly.
Before I decide if I'm going to buy the generic toothpaste. Yeah, I got it.
Exactly.
That's good advice. Carol, please.
Thank you. Resilience was very helpful. I was going to mention, I would love to have some takeaways from this pessimism versus optimism. Things couldn't be worse, and yes, they could. Right now, in these times, as a Jew, in the world, in our country, I would love to be able to apply this Torah portion and these premises to something helpful that keeps it a little down to size, because it's hard.
I'll give you a couple of things that I think might be helpful. There are things that seem much larger than they are. Social media is one of them. If you look at social media, you would think the world hates us. Hates us. The whole world. But that is a fabrication. That is an algorithm of fabrication. Those are bot farms in Qatar. This is a very strategic manipulating of social media that magnifies rather than accurately reflects worldwide sentiment. So that's one thing to remind yourself of, that this is social media. This is what you see about Jews through social media. It's all magnified. Most people in the world don't hate us. Do you know what most people in the world think of Israel? They don't. Okay. So that's one thing about this perspective issue. And the other thing that I think is helpful when it comes to this perspective as a Jew in the current situation that we find ourselves in is, and it is germane to this Torah portion, we have been here before. We have been here. We have been afraid. We have had to fight for our right to exist. Sometimes it does seem like there are giants out there, but guess what? Iran launches 100 missiles and not one of them does, hurts anyone. Iran is not a first world power. They're not a giant. But if you listen to the news or you think about it or you hear about it, God knows, you would think they were China, and they're not. I'm not trying to diminish the dangerous situation we're in, but it is in no way accurately reflected in media, especially social media. So it is this, can you take and in terms of resilience, this is where I think this Google Earth view is very helpful, because tell me a time in history when the Jews didn't survive. You can't think of one. I'm not saying there wasn't a tremendous amount of pain and trauma and damage and death, but you cannot think of a single time that we have been oppressed, that as a people, as a faith, we haven't survived. We have. And I think that's a good place to end it. I have a 1:00 Zoom. I'm 4 minutes late for everyone. I'm really sorry. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. I hope I'll see some of you at the Resnick campus tonight. If not, have a beautiful Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
At Irmis tonight.
Yay.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Hope to see you tonight.